My mom is a pediatrician, and she was active in a NGO of pediatrician working with kids victims of war. So she would travel occasionally to countries where there had been wars and then come back and show us pictures. And I just also think he was present in the house, the whole kind of culture in the family and in the social world that I inhabited was always present. So I can't remember a time where I was not wondering, how come I'm born in France in a middle-class family, and instead I could be like an African girl, and then I would have to spend all my day collecting water, and what kind of responsibilities that places on me to have had that luck of being born who I am. I was always interested in trying to understand what poverty is and what can be done about it, as far as I can remember from when I was a kid. But I didn't really think of economics, and I didn't really think of how this could be a career to think about poverty. So I was studying something else, and then which was history. And then I spent 1 year in Russia, and there I met some economists, and I realized the positions that they had, which is kind of at a juncture between academia and the policy world. And I felt, this is something that I can do. Actually, I can study economics and I can become useful in the fight against poverty while maintaining some distance, not being exactly in the action. So that's when I decided that I would do economics and that I would study development economics. So the Poverty Action Lab, full name actually is Abdul Latif Jamil Poverty Action Lab, after the father of the donor who made that possible, who is a very interesting person in his own right. It's a network of people. So it's a network of 60 researchers. And there is one lab at MIT in Boston. There's one lab here in Paris. There's one in South Africa. There is one in Chile. There is one in India. And what unites all of these people, who are professors in various universities, and all the people who work for them, is number one, working on poverty, which can be poverty in poor countries or poverty in rich countries. And number two, our motto is translating research into action. And our goal is to ensure that policy decisions are based on scientific evidence. And the way we do that is working with the THEM methodology, which is adapted from clinical trials to test new drugs. So those are called randomized control trials. So, for example, for a drug, if you want to know the effectiveness of a new drug, you're going to give the new drug to a sample of people, and then another sample of people won't get the drug, will get a placebo or maybe the old drug. And then you compare them and you're seeing what the effect is. And we are trying to do the same thing, but for social policies. So, for example, if you want to know what's the effect of putting computers in school, whether it helps kids to learn or whether it distracts them, you can take, say, 100 schools in a town and then put in place computers and software, etc., in 50 schools that you choose randomly and not in the other 50. And then when you compare, because you've chosen the schools where you gave the computers randomly, the only difference is the computers. So you can really say the computers, this was their effect. They improved learning, or they distracted students didn't learn. So that gives you very precise answers to these policy questions. And that should help in ensuring that governments and NGOs and anybody really spend whatever limited money they have the most effective way possible. So what the experiment allows to do is really you can go one of two ways. One, you can start from a theory, which might be a psychological theory of what's the, for example, in this case, why are parents not immunizing their kids? And here the psychology is not coming, the theory is not coming from us, but coming from psychology with this, tendency of the human being to always procrastinate because the present is always much more important than the future. So the small costs of going to vaccinate your kids, even if you know that you should do it, you're thinking, well, I should do it, but if I do it today, or if I wait next month, what's the chance that the kids get sick in just 1 month? It's not very high. So the cost of postponing is not very high. So you'll postpone because you're thinking that today you're really too busy and you don't want to deal with a sick child and all that. And so next month, of course, becomes today, and again, you procrastinate and all that. So that's kind of the theory. And then that theory suggests that because the cost of immunizing is relatively low, you just need to offset it with a pretty small benefit. So a kilo of lentils, and then you should get a huge effect on immunization. And then the alternative theory, which is a much more rational theory, is people don't do it because they are very against immunization. Because given all the benefits, the only reason not to do it is if you feel that there is something like wrong about it, in which case a kilo of lentil is not going to change your mind. So in this particular case of the lentil, the theory actually comes first, which is really the lentil is a test of that, which is the main barrier is this procrastination. And we have a prediction that if the theory is right, then we should have a big effect. If the theory is wrong, we have no effect. And the amount of the reward, like a kilo of lentil, not a kilo of gold, is chosen to test that. Something small on purpose. So there, in some sense, the theory is first. So the why comes almost first. There is this French philosopher from the 18th century. He wrote this very beautiful text called Discours sur la comète. That's everybody was wondering, everybody was persuaded that these asteroids, when they are in the sky, that's bad. And people were writing very long pieces about why, like why might it be bad, and what are the mechanisms through which this flying objects can have bad influence on Earth. And he wrote this text saying, you don't even know that it's bad. You should first worry about whether it's bad before wondering why it's bad. So in French, he says, like the sentence that I really like is inquiétons-nous du fait avant de nous inquiéter de la cause. We must know whether that exists before trying to understand why. So here it's a little bit the same thing. I agree that it's not enough to know that the lentils make a difference, but if you don't know that they do in the first place, what is it you're trying to explain? A lot of people spend an enormous amount of time trying to explain things that are not, or making very long predictions or pronouncements about what should be there and never checking them out. With malaria, of course, the best thing would be to try to find a vaccine. But that's kind of fine to the future. We should put some money aside to do that. But like, what do you do like right now? And there, the consensus is that insecticide-treated bed nets are a way to prevent malaria, because if a lot of people sleep under the bed nets, the mosquitoes don't have the time to bite them before they transmit the virus. So I think that there is a consensus on that. But where there is a bit of a fight is whether you should give the bed nets for free or whether you should ask people to pay for them. And the reason for the fight is, on the one hand, if you give them for free, more people will have them. And so it will really blanket the area, and therefore mosquitoes will die or go away. But on the other hand, some other people say, well, but if you give them for free, people are not going to recognize their values, they are going to use them. So there is this big fight, very aggressive. And strangely enough, it's actually something it's pretty easy to do, to know whether we should go one way or the other. One, it hinges partly on whether people are very sensitive to price in buying the mosquito net. So if I give it to you for free, you take it for sure. But if I ask you to pay just a little, do you also take it or do you not take it? And the second thing is it hinges on the fact that once I give you a net, do you use it? If I give it to you for free or if you had to pay a little bit, and does that vary? And so one young French colleague of mine, Pascaline Dupart, ran this experiment where she gives the bed nets to different people at different prices, from 0 to little more. And then she can look first at how many people decide not to take it when it's not free. And she found that it's a pretty large number of people decide not to take it when it's not free. And secondly, she can ask, what is your probability to use the mosquito net as a mosquito net, as opposed to a wedding veil or a fishing net, when you got it for free or when you paid for it? And there she finds that actually it doesn't make any difference, that people who got it for free are using it just as well. So when you put these two things together, it suggests that you should really give mosquito nets away for free. So there's this very heated ideological debate, and it turns out there is an answer. It could have gone the other way, but in this case, we get, I think, a reasonably clear answer from the experiments. With poverty, I think because it's somewhat foreign to the people who are working on it, there is a very big tendency to start from cartoon character views of what the poor are. So the Victorians thought the poor were slothful. So their policies was, put debtor prisons and orphanages and all that. One very important view, the poor are starving, so then, you need to have food aid and lug food around and all that. Or the poor are entrepreneurs, and then microcredit solution to everything. The poor need to be involved in their own, in the management of their services, so you put beneficiary committees everywhere, and that's going to solve all the problem. So it's kind of like that. So, and it's not that every single of these cliches doesn't have a bit of truth in it, but each of them misses all the other ones, plus many other things. So the richness of the human beings that we're talking about gets completely lost, and therefore the policies kind of miss the mark. And the policies are being implemented with complete ignorance of the reality in the field. And once they are in place, they get sustained by inertia. So in the book, And for economics, we call this 3I problem. That's ideology, ignorance, inertia, where, and we think that's the main disease of development policy. So ideology is this cartoon character thing. So poor are slothful, poor are entrepreneurs, poor are starving, poor are ... And policies get designed on the basis of these ideologies. And these ideologies tell you what you should be doing. Then they are conceived in complete ignorance of the realities in the field. So people are so convinced by their own ideology that they don't really need to go and check what exists on the field. And then the third I is inertia, which is when something's in place, becomes someone's job to check all the dots and making sure it happens and all that. And so it just continues regardless of its effectiveness. So you see entire programs that just are completely a complete waste because of that. And at some level, it's frustrating because you're thinking, well, come on, guys, you could do better. At another level, it's somewhat encouraging because a lot of policies don't really work very well. And many people who work in this field are somewhat despondent and discouraged. They feel that it's never going to work because there is this big conspiracy against the poor. And, depending on whether you're more left-wing or right-wing, it can be, capitalism, or it can be the culture, corruption, or something like that. Some people feel like the problems are so deep and that's so interwoven and it's all complex. That complex world is always kind of an excuse for not doing anything. But if the problem is mainly 3I, then often that means that the solution also means you need to identify what was misconceived, fix it, and just get it done. It is frustrating to always hit that thing, hit that 3I. But you're talking to people who are perfectly decent people and they really want to do something, but they just can't take it upon themselves to actually get out and do it. The fact that you are poor sometimes blocks the opportunities that you have, such that makes you more likely to remain poor. And that creates poverty traps, because the very fact of being poor has so much consequences on people. So, for example, because you're poor, no one is going to lend you money. So even if you have an idea, you can't realize it. Because you're poor, you don't have access to clean water, so a big part of your day has to be spent thinking about when I'm going to get water, and then I need to boil the water, and that takes away the mental energy and the resources that you could have to, nurture your children. The fact of being poor, the fact of having no money, that changes the opportunity. That also changes psychology, but not in a way that's not very deep. If suddenly we did give a lot of money to people, that would, I think, change the way they would behave pretty quickly. We've seen that. We've worked with an NGO, not an NGO, a microcredit organization actually in India, that gave, not lent, gave assets to very, very, very poor family. They call them ultra poor family. Those are families that have had huge troubles, and that often single women or a woman whose husband beat them or drinks or things like that. Just stories of absolute desperation. And not doing much usually. Not doing much work, kids not being in school and things like that. And what they are doing is they give them, say, 2 cows or 4 goats or a bunch of chicken or something to get some small business started. And then they hold their hands for some time at the beginning of the process, give them a small cash allowance so that they don't immediately sell the assets, and get them to meet every day. And that program, after 18 months, what you find is that people are doing much better than the value of the assets. It has multiplied. They consume more food, their kids are more likely to be in school, they work more, their happiness, self-reported happiness is higher, they're much less likely to be depressed. And that took them out of a trap. And that's just a cow. That doesn't make them Bill Gates or anything. But it shows that there is a kind of poverty trap that has to do with just the desperation of being poor. And a little bit of hope, or saying, well, you're not that person anymore. You're not the person who has nothing. You have something that you can take care of. Changes the dynamic. So I think if we did rearrange all of the wealth, then a lot of people would suddenly find, okay, now I can do something. And the lack of hope, the lack of perspective, the fact that the finish line is so far away, that discourages people to even get started. We are obsessed by the present, and the entire future is much less important than the present, and we make mistakes on the basis of that. But what happens when you are richer is that the whole society is helping you dealing with this problem. Everything is organized. The richer you are, the more someone is taking your hand and making sure that you don't fall into these traps that you might set for yourselves. So, for example, we spoke about immunization earlier. If you are in France or in Portugal, it's not that you have a choice to immunize your child. You have to do it, and at some schedule. So, you can be the most impatient people in the world. You're never going to fall into the trap of not immunizing your children. Or you're not going to drink bad water because the water that comes out of the tap is good. And you're going to save for your retirement because the money is going to be deducted from your bank account. So that's true across countries. The poorer the countries, the less you have those safeguards. The richer people are more protected than the poorer people, and the poorer you are, the more you have to take care of yourself. But you're not better equipped to do that. The poor are not superior human beings. They are just the same. But nothing protects them against themselves. So that tends to make them look like very impatient and say, why aren't the poor not saving, and why aren't they? Well, the thing is, if we were poor, we wouldn't be saving either. And I think that's why you can be mistaken and say there must be a psychology of poverty because the poor are not saving and not boiling their water, and they are just not very responsible. But the thing is, we would be the same. And because we have the luxury that all of these little fights, we don't have to fight. Whatever is our own self-control muscles, it can be used to exercise the self-control on the important stuff. So we also exhibit more patience on things where there is a choice. And if we are a poor person, where we would be fighting all day with like all the small things, and then at the end, you can't, in addition, start thinking about planning the very long term and the education of your kids and all that, when you have to deal with all these small things along the way the best way possible. In my view, there is no... there are people who are more impatient, less impatient than others. I think that's a small reasons with... But mostly it goes the other way, that everybody is on average the same, rich or poor. but the consequences for the poor are just much, much bigger, and it's much more brought into open by the way they live. And I think we get confused by that. Hence this kind of tendency to be a bit patronizing sometimes. I think if you look at it over sort of a long run, then there is no reason not to be hopeful. Things are improving in fits and starts and in this sort of annoyingly slow way, but it's sort of happening. We could do more, but you see things that work. And there are fewer very, very poor people than there used to be 10 or 15 years ago. Most of us are trying to find a reason for their life, trying to justify their life. I think in my case, I also have to justify the fact that I have a very happy life, and always had, born in a loving family with, very educated parents, who fun siblings, and and no health problems and all that. Somehow you feel like, are you going to do something with all these gifts? So that's, it's very selfish in a way. But for me, it's more interesting to be selfish in this way than to accumulate money to buy yacht or something. It just happens to be my thing.